Redevelopment Commission meeting on July 17th, 2023. First item of business is roll call.
Deb Putnam here.
Sarah Bowerly Danson here.
Deborah Meyerson here.
Randy Cassidy here.
Cindy Canarney here. Staff present.
Christina Finley, Hand Department.
Anna Hansen, Hand Department.
Larry Allen, Legal.
John Hamilton, Mayor.
John Fernandez, Bill.
Jeff Underwood.
All right, I think we have everybody. Next item of business is reading of the minutes for July 3rd, 2023. Do any commissioners have any comments or questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Deb Hutton, I move to approve the minutes of July 3rd, 2023.
Randy Cassidy, I'll second.
We have a first and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item of business is examination of claims for July 21st, 2023 in the amount of $139,318.95. Do any commissioners have any questions or comments? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the examination of claims from July 21st.
Deb Hutton, second.
We have a first and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item of business is examination of payroll registers for July 14, 2023 in the amount of $39,474.06. Do any commissioners have any comments or questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Sarah Bowerly Danson, I motion to approve the payroll registered for July 14th, 2023.
Deb Hutton, second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right. Next item of business is report of officers and committees. Is there a director's report?
I have a brief one, but I think the mayor would like to.
Thanks a lot. I won't be long. I appreciate the chance just to say hello, which I try to do every once in a while. Thank you for all the work you do. It's great and so important to the city. And I know you're all busy people. And what you do is making a difference every day in this community, and I appreciate that. I also thought it might be helpful just very briefly to introduce, I know we've created a new entity, the City of Bloomington Capital Improvement Corp. You've got a member who sits on it, but CBCI, as we affectionately call it, is kind of activating, getting more into work that I thought might be helpful just very briefly to mention, and also just discuss questions if you have any concerns or anything about that. So when the city administration looks at all that's in front of us, sometimes we identify particular projects, efforts that are going to be intense, specialized, perhaps long-lasting, that make us think about how's that going to fit in our workday. Everybody in city government's pretty busy. When we have a project, and Hopewell's a key example, Hopewell's a huge project. We've been working intensively on it, and it's going to get busier because it's moving forward. You guys know it well, having supported it, bought it, investing in it. And we looked at different options. One option would be let's bring on more staff to do that over the next 10 years. But the combination of needing certain expertise and kind of thinking about how to build more public engagement in that too. We created CBCI in part to handle and lead big projects like Hopewell. That means they are going to be doing more and more that may feel kind of like city administration stuff, like they're going to be, and Sarah, you know this well, being on the board, I wouldn't be surprised if they staff up over the next year or two to help move forward with development there, identifying partners, marketing, working on with the private investment, in addition to all the public investment that's going in there. So I just wanted to mention, kind of reflect that CBCI is kind of this new entity that's almost an arm of the administration with a board and more public engagement than we would typically do purely from staff, but that is very much into a lot of weeds too of leading decisions about things. And I know you interact with them, but I guess I'm trying to be able to articulate the differences, because this group, longstanding state statutory, is the custodian of resources and long-term investments on behalf of the community. And you've done amazing things like Switchyard Park and Trades District and investing in Hopewell. And sitting kind of above that and trying to marshal those resources and make sure they're done well. But I guess I'm trying to make sure we don't, you're not responsible for the development of Hopewell, I guess, in a way. You don't have to worry about picking one or which developer is the right developer. But we're trying to let CBCI go forward with that. Does that help any? And Sarah, you've been on both. I don't know if there's anything I can do or answer questions or anything like that. But thanks for letting me be here.
I'd rather have other people who are not in CBCI meetings also have an opportunity to ask questions or reflect.
Yeah, I appreciate kind of bringing that up. I remember that we'd seen the organizational chart when CBCI first started, and still getting the hang of it. And as you know, as it grows and there's staff and trying to figure out which is which, and RDC as custodian of resources, trying to understand what is our responsibility for the investment that the RDC has made in an example like the Hopewell project. Again, I understand that RDC is not picking the developer, and there's different parties that are responsible for different things, but I would love, at some point to revisit that organizational chart and to look at that again now that we're kind of a little more seated into it and CBCI has been around a little bit longer. And just, anyway, so trying to get a sense of RDC, what is RDC's responsibility with relation to Hopewell compared to what CBCI's is?
Yeah, and I probably shouldn't try to wing that, I guess the way I would ask you to think about it is when CBCI is here, it's very similar to city staff. And just as you want to make sure, you want to hear about what we're doing, you want to hear about plans that, as the city engineer is designing the roads that you are paying for, right? That on behalf of the community that you're steering that money. You want to make sure, Andrew's can tell you what's going on and that it all sounds copacetic, but you don't have to design the roads or we have a city council and we have planning and all that stuff. And CBCI is kind of a member of that orbit, I guess I would say, if that's helpful.
Thank you.
Another way to think about it is they're an advisory board of sorts to the RDC and the city, but the RDC is the legal body that has legal jurisdiction over the Hopewell project. Or they're there to make recommendations, formulate plans to the RDC on behalf of the city.
You own the land.
Right.
In the RDC, and you are funding it. Now, I think it's possible that at some point that could change, that transaction could change. If you could sell the land to a developer, you could retain long-term ownership of the land, you could transfer land to the CBCI to develop it too. And that, of course, was for further discussion. But right now you're the owner and you're the funder, and they're partners like the administration in executing the vision that we've all had for it, what you invested for on behalf of the community. And you're kind of the voices of the community, right? That representing this funding that is steered toward certain things and trying to make sure it's going to the purposes that it was intended for and that kind of thing.
So when we look at the CBIC and trying to put ourselves around it, and I appreciate a group that always tries to help move things forward. When we're talking about it in that light, primarily it's been Hopewell.
Yeah.
But my understanding is CBCI will have other duties throughout the community. Is that the premise long term? Because the RDC is primarily the administrator of the TIF revenues.
Right.
In which case, the CBIC may select the individuals, put the deals together, but then they'll come through the RDC in order to provide the funding necessary to take care of it. Is that?
So CBCI is a really good point that they've been created, and their first project out of the gate is Hopewell. We've talked about, similar kinds of projects, or the Trace District, and, got Mr. Fernandez here who's been working on that. And the fact that we have Pat East and John Fernandez and that whole group leading that effort means CBCI kind of stand back on that. There's no need for that. We got a great team doing that. We've talked about the arts. We've talked about potentially convention center, though that doesn't look like that's the direction. But CBCI could do things that don't involve TIF money too, right? They could get involved in things that would not directly implicate the RDC that way. So I think of them really more as an arm of the city administration helping execute plans and implement and develop, sometimes develop them, but.
They're like a special projects.
Yeah.
group.
Like think of Larry and Alex and like these guys who have so much on their plates, kind of helping, and our team helping accomplish some of those special projects. It's good.
Yeah, I think so right now, the CBCI, we meet and, the board meets, and because there are no staff, it's just sort of getting everyone up to speed with things. But eventually, so right now the CBCI is just the board and not much else. But eventually the board is just going to be there to advise the staff and move that forward, as opposed to being the only kind of thing, the only part of the organization. And would you mind if I gave a more tried to kind of develop a more concrete example of sort of the
Sure.
sorts of things? So
Yeah.
a couple weeks ago we had a long discussion here about some concerns about a line budget item around website development. And we had a very similar and as lengthy discussion in the CBCI afterwards in our board meeting. And one of the things that became clear is that it was clear because of RDC looking at this and having some concerns, and then the CBCI also was able to realize had similar concerns, and also has some people on the CBCI who have more of a background in marketing and social media, so we're able to even further articulate some of those concerns. I think then it became clear, okay, well, we need a better path forward with this, right? But who's going to do that? Because us on the RDC, we're not going to sit down together and come up with, well, what's our plan? What's our plan for how to, what should we be doing with this website? Who should we be working with to develop the website? We basically got to vote on either whether to pay a particular contract or not, but we don't have the capacity to really go out and get contracts and things like that. But the CBCI could, especially if it brings on some kind of staff, and then to the extent that that city staff don't have the capacity to really do those sorts of things. We know that city staff are really stretched, and that actually kind of created a little bit of the disconnect in the first place when it came to that. So I think that's is that a kind of concrete example that would be?
So in the conversations between the two of you, what staff is the CIBC going to hire? Because you guys are nonprofit volunteers,
that's a
but the
great-
board, and whose budget is it they
That's a great-
use to hire a website or a marketing person or whatever you want, any of those staffing people? They'll be literally under the board
Great
of
question.
the CBIC? And
So
where will they get
the
money?
CBCI is a separate nonprofit, and the mayor appoints and the city council appoints, fills out the 5. Right now, the CBCI is being supported by 2 contractors. One is Deb Coons, whom you know well, who's helping with the Hopewell project, and the second is U3 Advisors, which is a new owner's rep, if you will, which you also know about. And those entities, in addition to city staff, are helping advise on things like who should we retain to build out areas 9 and 10? And we got different proposals from them. And, you know, the CBCI helped pick the owner's rep. And soon we will be putting out for a solicitation development in the Hopewell East, right? And those advisors, we have no immediate plans, but it would not be at all surprising to me if CBCI doesn't have its own staff at some point that would be part of its both city money and RDC money that's supporting in building out the 100 million plus investments that we're looking
And
for.
responsible to the board.
Responsible to the board,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think that likely will happen at some point. I mean, this is, Hopewell Development's a big, complicated, long project and needs a lot of expert advice, and I think it's quite possible they will bring that on.
Thanks.
So I kind of missed where the funding would be coming from, Mayor. Is it TIF?
One of two sources.
Going to the separate nonprofit?
Well, either that or city support,
Okay, so
Directly.
from the city budget in
Yeah.
someplace, okay.
yeah. Just like we would hire staff to do that,
Either TIF or general fund
yeah.
is the two funding sources we'd be looking at, and anything TIF would come through
I
the
say
RDC.
city revenue a little more generally, just because we have things other than just the general fund, but city
City operating budget.
Yeah.
Okay. Silly, or not silly question, based upon, we haven't taken down the hospital site yet from IU Health, correct?
Taking ownership of
Yeah, we haven't taken ownership.
we've taken ownership of part of it, but not
Not
the rest of it, right?
The other portion of it. Is that something you're looking at, taking possession, then looking at CBCI, or?
You will take, well, you want to answer, Larry should answer that.
It will come to the RDC, so it's not something that we're gonna delegate to anyone else. The first step is that we're gonna just complete the terms of the purchase agreement with IU Health, which means it's gonna come into the possession of, yeah.
And you will own the 24 acres. What do you own? 8 right now or something? Give or
Something
take?
like that,
Something
yeah.
like, yeah.
Okay. So any other transactional aspects will come through the RDC before any other decisions are made in that capacity. But the CBCI's first mission is dealing with Hopewell from the current
Yeah,
administration
it's really
standpoint.
to realize the master plan and advance all of that into the marketplace and make real what is on paper right now, so. Yeah. All right, I don't want to
Great,
take too
thank
much
you.
of your
Thank you
meeting,
very
but
much.
thank you so much for what you do. You're doing great things. Thanks. See you.
Anything else from a director's report perspective?
Regarding what he was speaking to, or just mine in general?
Yours.
Yeah, I have a couple of things.
Who are you again?
Oh, Anna Hansen, Assistant Director of HAND.
Welcome.
Thank you. We just completed an environmental review with HUD, so we're awaiting our letter on that. We do have a backlog of environmental reviews, so we have put out an RFQ for assistance with those, so that was released on Friday. Due to that backlog, we are also going to be moving up the CDBG application calendar year to accommodate for more time moving forward. And then, just so that you know, we were approved for the 2023 program year with HUD for the CDBG funds. We got $855,868 for CDBG and $642,907 for home. We're going to be able to start using those funds as soon as funding agreements go out and the environmental reviews are done. So we're making progress with that.
How does that compare to previous years?
That's a very good question. I'm a month in here, so Christina can probably
we
answer
actually
that.
got just a little bit more in home this year
Okay.
and a little bit of a decrease in CDBG.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any other questions? If not, we'll move to the legal report.
Just briefly, there were some maintenance issues that are occurring on the properties that you all own on Dodge Street. So we have obtained 3 quotes for people to go in and clear some brush and trees and things like that out of those. All of those came in under $5,000. So we're assessing which one's going to be the best provider, because there were some slight differences in the quotes just in terms of how much they were going to do, whether they pulled tree stumps or not. So I just want to give you a heads up that we're in the process of vetting that. We'll choose somebody to go ahead and go in and clear out those parcels, and then we'll report back to you on the results for that expenditure. Otherwise, I'm happy to answer any questions. I also guess I should note that this may be my last meeting just as the attorney for the RDC. We will be naming someone to come and fill in for the remainder of the year, and I'll keep you apprised of who that's going to be.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's bittersweet because you will still come and see us.
Yeah, it's going to be a weird party that you guys have as soon as I'm not here, and that'll make me feel very uncomfortable, but that's okay.
Has Alex Crowley also moved on? August 7th officially? August 7th? Oh, okay.
Yeah, so when Alex is back, I'm sure he'll have some news for you. Yeah.
All right. Well, congratulations, Larry. We appreciate all your support. And moving on to treasurer's report.
No report, still going to be here for a while and happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. Any business development updates?
I don't believe we have any, but happy to answer any questions you all may have.
All right, next item of the agenda is a Hopewell update.
Great. Thank you. Deb Coons here with JS Health. We did include, again, the development schedule for U3, but there really haven't been updates since the last 2 weeks ago. So I'll note that in your packet, but no real updates of note there. I do want to make sure everybody is penciled on their calendar the celebration of the groundbreaking for Phase 1 East on Friday, 3:30 p.m. on the site. And so we're excited about celebrating with the community and continuing to explore how we continue to expand those communications and outreach with the community, as even Sarah was referencing earlier. So that's exciting and a fun thing that we can promote. Addition to that, in one of our last meetings with the RDC, you were presented the plat, and wanted to report that the Planning Commission did approve the plat. And there were some conditions, but those were easily items that can be incorporated, so that is good news. The parking garage study that you funded is kicking off officially with the vendor next week. They've been flowering us with questions and requests for documentation as they kick off. Although I believe most of that site access for that team is going to happen during some due diligence periods that we are coordinating with IU Health. So I would say that'll probably be a few months before we have any kind of substantial update on the parking garage, because they've got to do their due diligence side of it. Coming back to the development piece, the core building, there is a flurry of activities related to the fact that our proposed developer is going to be submitting for the LIHTC tax credits by the end of the month. So we are getting very close to having everything from that the city needs to provide to them, although there continues to be lots of back and forth. And we want to make sure that they hit that deadline, because that will put us in a position that hopefully before the end of the year, we will know whether the core building is receiving tax credits for its redevelopment to achieve 38 all affordable units, both in the core building and for the expansion, which was approved by the Historic Preservation Commission. Next, on the continuing with the development side of things, that we talked about the RFI, the development of blocks RFI. So we'll end in our update today, one with letting you know that we have reached out to our proposers on the development side of those blocks, and we are having interviews with the evaluation team led by U3, and that'll happen by the end of the month. And so that is on track as has been scheduled. The last item we have for our update is I'm going to ask my associate Desma to actually share a lot of the findings that we have. Several months ago, you asked us, when we were talking about the project review form, you asked us to consider how do we reduce the amount of incidents and security incidents that are happening at the existing buildings at blocks 8, 9, and 10. And so we've done what we think is a comprehensive look at everything. We are not asking for an action tonight on it, but we would welcome your feedback, or if there's other questions that we need to get answered. But we wanted to make sure that we've got all of that due diligence place, and then there's some potential paths forward as we get prepared for that. So with that, I want to introduce you to my associate Desma. She has done a lot of the research, and she'll be walking us through this analysis. All right, see if I can make this share screen thing work. Uh-oh. Where did it go? I say it was right there ready to go. Technology.
Great when it works.
Okay. There we go. All right, so as Deb mentioned, we have heard some questions about security and wanted to take some time to just tell you what we've learned, some tips, tricks, thoughts that we've picked up, and looking at how we might be able to address our on-site security, because we do know that there are a lot of incidents that are occurring, and costs for ongoing security are also quite expensive. So want to make sure that we're taking a holistic look at all different options and opportunities. So if we take a look at what's going on the site currently, we do have a fenced-in area that is still owned by IU Health. It is the area in red, and they are making sure that security roams that property 4 times daily. We also have parts of the site that have already been turned over to the city. It's this area in blue, and currently we are also having roaming security patrols in this area at nighttime from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And that is costing right now just under $110,000 for the year to do those security patrols. One of the things we do want to make sure we consider as we look for different security options going forward is we do know that when all of the buildings east of Rogers were demolished, that a lot of those incidents did decrease. Without having buildings and property there to mess around with, to get into, we got to see a lot of those incidents go down. We do know that most of our current activity is occurring south of 1st Street in this orange area where we do own not only property but buildings as well. We are seeing probably an average of 1 to 2 reported incidents a night. And these can be anything from we see a big gulp sitting on this doorstep. Somebody was clearly here since last time we patrolled, to a door is propped open where the security patrol will go and clear the building, make sure the door is shut and locked, to sometimes we do see vandalism with broken windows or people getting into these areas and just doing damage because they can. And we also know that as we move forward, we will be responsible for all of this additional property that the city will be coming to own, that we will also want to make sure is being watched and maintained. Currently, most of this property is vacant and all the way down to just our site, but we do have the parking garage and the core building that we do want to make sure that we're maintaining as well. So as we look at ways that we might be able to reduce incidents, one of the ways that we can do this is increasing presence. So what are the opportunities to step up our security presence on site? We have gotten some quotes to increase that roaming security patrols to 24/7. So we would be patrolling all day and all night with a car and visibility on site. Now we do understand that is an expensive cost. It's about $210,000 annually if we want to up those patrols to full day. If we look at why these are good ideas, we do know that having those marked cars driving around is showing a visible security presence, which can definitely help deter incidents. We do have these security measures on site, so the police don't have to be called every time somebody sees something going on or notices something going on site. Our paid staff can go out, take a look, try to make the incident go away before having to call in Bloomington Police Department to escalate that to the next level. And again, that does reduce the stress on your police department because we know we don't want to be pulling them out to our site on a regular basis. On the con side, these are very expensive to have going on full time. All of our security patrols, they cannot see within the building. So unless they're seeing evidence that someone has access to building from the outside, they're not going inside of these buildings to check. They're driving around and occasionally getting out and walking, but mostly it is drive-by. So they're often catching up after incidents have occurred. Someone might have been on site, propped the door open and left, and that's when they're noticing that somebody had been there. It's not really an in-the-moment type thing, so some damage can be occurring internally in these buildings without anybody knowing. So in addition to increasing presence, we also wanted to look at how do we make sure that we're securing these structures. We do have structures that we want to maintain, especially core, as that is looking to be reutilized. And once IU patrols stop, we are going to maintain that fence. That will become part of the property transfer, so that fence that is around the property will stay, which should help deter some incidents. But we also want to make sure that we're making the best choices possible, and we feel like boarding up those windows to help protect those first floor windows would be a very strong idea. And we also want to make sure we board up the windows on South Rogers as well. 714 South Rogers is where we're getting the majority of our incidents right now, because that building is large, so anything that we can do to help secure it is good. We also would like to install some barricades at the parking garage, so if anyone does get within that fence, we don't have people going up doing joyrides and trying to do donuts within the garage. Obviously not damage to the structure, not damage to themselves. That's not anything that we want to see on the news. So we also have some opportunities to add technology. As technology becomes more prevalent in today's society, how can we use that to help us with our security options? So one thing that we can look at is a solar-powered site camera. And so there actually is another construction site going up in Bloomington where they have utilized similar technology. These cameras go on site, they're powered through the solar charger, and they can constantly be taking video over all of the site. They can be recording all of that action, and incidents can be reviewed later by police or security patrol. This does give a really great record of what happens. It can also do a really great time lapse, so we can see what happens on the site as construction and progress continue to go on. This could also be a nice option for you guys for longevity and time lapse. But these are best used after an incident has occurred. So similar to the security patrols, it is after something happens that you're going to go back and you're going to check these tapes to see what you have a record of. The other technological option that we would like to take a look at are these ideas of a remote motion activated camera. And this is something that they've been using locally here in Indianapolis. This is actually the security company that patrols my commercial building and my house. And one of the things that I really liked about this option, and they created it for these construction sites and purposes, because everything within this product is wireless, so it's all going over a cellular data network, and it is all battery powered. So nothing has to be recharged, nothing has to be connected to power, since we have cut utilities off to most of the buildings on site. But what this does is the system actually has a motion activated sensor that when something trips that signal, it will do a 10-second recording that it sends to their dispatch center to say, okay, we've seen action. Is this a human? Is it an animal? Is it a door that flopped open in the wind? And their security professionals will take a look at what happened in that 10-second clip and then take the next series of action. So if we have security patrols on site, that might be pinging the security patrol officer, sending them to whatever building the incident is occurring, and having them go explore and understanding what's going on there, and then still escalating to the police if need be, but hopefully making sure that we're catching people on immediate entry. So we could use these blocking doors and stairs. So anytime we do have a person present, we'll be able to have these things alert and let people know that there's something going on our site that we need to take care of. Again, this does catch incidents as they occur, and they're really focused on securing those structures. So this isn't something that you're going to put out in the middle of a large space, but it is something that we would definitely want to have on these buildings that we want to make sure we're securing. It also is very cost effective, so we can get a basic 2-camera system that also has the alert for about a $3,000 install, and then $56 a month for each system that we're monitoring. So I think there are some interesting options as we look towards cost effective options to reduce incidents with technology. And then again, we also have the abolished structures. So this, we do know, will take down our incidents because there's less places for incidents to occur. On the downside, these are often a little bit expensive. We do know that right now, 615 West 1st Street, that's the little blue guy in the middle, that is the building that's currently being used as our construction field office for Phase 1 East and the work that's going on there. So we definitely want to keep that one, at least for now. And 714 South Rogers, we also have at least one developer who has offered to reutilize that site as part of their project, so probably don't want to tear that one down quite yet.
That building also, for the quote that we received to tear down 714 South Rogers, is estimated at $760,000. So a high price tag, it's a large building. So if someone wants to reuse it and we can save those dollars, might be a good thing to look at. The demolition that we might do later for 615 West First is coming in at about $30,000. And then if we want to demolish all of the buildings with the red X's, that's looking at about $675,000 to take those off. So definitely an option that we can pursue if interested. And so let's take a look at costs, and I'm gonna have you guys ask all kinds of questions because I'm sure there are at least more than one. So for increasing presence, we do also have the option to maintain our security presence, to do that annual 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. To do those nighttime roaming patrols, which seems to be when most activity is occurring. We did have the opportunity to talk to Chief Dykoff to see, hey, if we have real security professionals here in Bloomington, let's talk to them about what they're seeing and what seems to be working well, since this is not a day-to-day thing that Deb and I tend to do. So he did say that having those security patrols and presence is very good, but he thinks that nighttime is definitely the time that if we're going to have patrols, that's really going to be our sweet spot. Less activity seems to happen during the day. He also recommended trying to have bright lights at any of the buildings that we have to help deter any incidents from occurring. But since we have no power, that is another option if we wanted to turn it on. But without power, bright lights are probably not going to be a first line of defense for us. We also have the option to increase our security presence, going up to about $210,000 annually if we want those 24/7 roaming patrols. For securing structures, looking at boarding up windows and installing barricades, we have an estimate for $25,000 to make that happen. For technology, we do have the solar-powered site camera option, and there are several companies that do this, so we can look up some options for you if that's an interest. The remote motion activated cameras, the estimate right now is about $35,000 for 2 years. So we've got about a $30,000 to get everything installed and running for the year, and then just ongoing service. And we would want to put those in to monitor core building, the parking garage, 615 West First, and 714 South Rogers. Basically, all of the structures that the RDC is going to own and want to make sure that we maintain and keep secure. And then we still have the option to demolish structures. So if we're looking at demolishing all those buildings with an X, so the vacant building south of First at $675,000, that would be kind of the initial demolition, and then a potential for secondary demolition if we do want to take down 714 South Rogers and 615 West First Street in the future, as those buildings might potentially no longer be useful to us. So taking a look at that, I'm sure there are a few questions, then we can talk about kind of what we think some of the options and recommendations might be once we get some of your feedback.
Questions?
Thank you, Desma. So my first question has to do with the cost of the presence options. You said that the $110,000 annually is based off of what we currently own. What will the costs be once we take possession of the land that's currently owned by the hospital? Is she there?
Did we lose Desmond? I think
Deb, you
maybe
can hear us?
Uh-oh. It looks like we maybe lost her. That's weird.
Okay. Well, Deb, you might be able to answer my question.
I'll jump in here. So I know John Zodi is probably the best person to answer that question because he's had all of the coordination with the local company that's providing that security. And so it probably is because he's had all those conversations. I don't know if I can exactly answer that, but as I understand it, it's about how many sites we have and the personnel that are there every night. So if we have a person visiting each of those sites for the same amount of time, we're just adding two locations to it. I would think from a personnel perspective, there's very little additional cost that is added because they're there for, let's say, an 8-hour shift, right? And so they're just stopping at 2 more locations. So their time at each building changes, but the locations don't, particularly since they're right there. So I would guess that is probably very minor, but that is a follow-up item with John Zodi we'll have to take.
Okay, thank you.
Deb, can you tell me where you got the estimate for the demolition?
So a couple different places. So Renizet Demolition was the demolition contractor for IU Health. So we have been getting several of those estimates directly from them. And then our team has a cost estimating department that does cost estimating all over. And so we use that as another another point of check. We have not intentionally not gone out and sought multiple proposals. And so that would be a next step. But obviously, we're just trying to make sure that we understand generally where things are going. But we did, because Renison had been here before and doing work for IU Health, we did seek some initial costs from them just to get an idea from them. And then, like I said, from JS Health as well.
How do your security estimates, you know, the patrols or whatnot, security and general estimates line up to how much we thought we were going to have to spend to secure the Hopewell site?
So the project review form anticipated that we would actually, which I think we even called it enhanced security. So that enhanced security actually went to more 24/7. So we know that the opportunity to keep, if we continue to keep the nighttime security, which is, you know, again, you know, even after conversation with Chief Dekov, that's really, and as we see the incidents, right, that's when most of the incidents are happening. So I think having that, there is some feeling that maybe that would continue, would be a positive thing. Obviously, the demolish, I think we had hoped that if we were able to demolish the buildings, that somehow that would be less money overall than doing security personnel throughout the next couple of years. That isn't coming true. The demolition costs are just higher than we thought that they would be. And so I think that's part of the challenge, is I know if the demolition costs were less money, then it would probably be easier for us to make that, you know, exact recommendations. Let's go ahead and demolish all the buildings. I think that's what everyone would love to see us do that, right? It would be easier in all aspects of it, but there's some cost associated with that. So then we'd have to talk about where does that cost come from.
So Deb, if the historical discussion about demolishing the buildings, would that cost then be passed on to whoever ends up buying the site as part of the purchase price?
I mean, right now, we did ask that all the proposers who submitted, that they include those demolition costs in their proposals. So that is one of the specific questions we have for them, and we've given them a series of questions to answer as part of those interviews. So I can say that we will know more by the end of the month on that. But that if you look at the RFI, that's exactly what we asked them to do, is to include that demolition cost.
And then my last question is, what are our thoughts on our hold period? You mentioned a couple years. Do you think that we'll have Hopewell developed out in a couple years, or will it be 5 to 10 years? Because then if you do the math on how much it costs us to demolish versus pay for security, the math doesn't quite work out so well.
Yeah, no doubt, the longer it goes, the more we're going to wish that we would have taken those buildings down soon. So I think, you know, if there's an opportunity to identify those funds and to, you know, to continue to get further pricing on that, I think that would be worthwhile. I don't think any of us has the exact crystal ball of how quickly it's going to build out. We have, obviously, for RFIs, blocks 8, 9, and 10, there are some options that are on the table, and we hope to be, you know, bringing something back here in the next couple of months. So for that consideration, the next RFI that will go out is for blocks 1, 2, and 3, and then we'll understand more about what the interest is on that side. You know, obviously there is a continued concern in the development world about high construction costs and high interest rates, and so I think we would be remiss if we didn't remind ourselves that we are up against some market challenges that I wish we didn't have, but that's a part of the reality that we're in. But there are still developers out there developing every day. New projects are starting, so that makes me very excited about it.
Can I follow up with Cindy's question about the cost of security and over short-term, long-term? In your experience, Deb, with developing properties, would it be, if we demolish those 8 buildings, would that move the whole development project faster, because we have already done that in one fell swoop, and we can then say, okay, here it is, we're gonna pass the cost on to you somehow or other, but we've already done that process all across the board, we're not gonna wait for one or the other. Would that move it ahead faster?
Well, I think it absolutely will. One, any developer, none of them like to include demolition in their development costs. So I think the more sites are ready, shovel ready or ready for development, A, the more attractive they are to developers, and B, the faster it will go. So I think you're exactly right about that, is it makes it a more attractive piece of property, for sure.
Thank you.
I just am curious to ask about the different options, excuse me, that are presented of how interchangeable things are, in the sense of if they're securing structures by boarding up windows and installing barricades and or a solar powered site camera, to what extent does that reduce the need for security? Like, is there a swap out there in the sense of instead of the additional 24/7 roaming patrols, if there's the boarded up windows and the site camera, does that like kind of, how do you interchange those different options?
Well, I'll give the quick answer, and then I'll let Desmond go into details. But I think if we think about the enhanced security option of having more people, increase that presence and doing more rounds during the day at the $110,000 a year versus a one-time installation of cameras plus $56 a month per camera, right? That's where you get that saving. So as opposed to bringing more people in, you use that technology. So Desmond, am I capturing that right, or what else would you add to that?
I completely agree, and I apologize. It kicked me out there for a minute, but I'm back. I think that's exactly what you're looking at the trade-off for, is if we have something that can monitor or utilize technology that can at least alert presence outside of times that we have active security personnel, then we do have the opportunity to ping that to the police department, which hopefully will be very infrequent. Again, what we're hearing is most of these incidents are definitely occurring at night, so it's that daytime that I think we could probably, if we have other means in place, if we boarded up our buildings, if we have some cameras there to catch the crazy things that might happen, during the day we should be able to alleviate some of that stress, the cost, and the extra personnel around. But I think a lot of people are thinking that having somebody patrolling at night, both 4 eyes on the site, making sure that there is that visible presence there as people are even just walking around on their own, and then continuing to reduce that draw on the Bloomington Police Department, because every time somebody sneezes or the wind blows funny, we don't want to be sending our police officers out there just to check it out. If that becomes very unnecessary, we want them on the right calls. So if we can do that, I think that would be kind of where the trade-off goes, is this nighttime with some additional measures. I think would make us feel pretty comfortable.
Desmond, did you do any kind of investigation or when you were talking to Chief Dekoff about the police force's capacity to respond to increased, incidents that are captured on the cameras, et cetera,
Sure.
et cetera?
They seems to be, the chief seems to be a little bit stretched thin. So anything that we can do that will help them obviously is a big part of what he thought would be very helpful for the Bloomington Police Department. And his continued things were anything that you can do overnight and any video recordings that you can give to me to make sure that we can follow up and track incidents once they've happened or while they're happening. So I believe his goal would be same thing if we don't have a patrol because either times are light or we choose to not do that, then the calls could go directly to the police department and hopefully be very few. And if we do have somebody, that would obviously be the first choice, is that any calls would go to them. It sounds like to date, there has only been one incident that has been escalated to a call to the police department, where there was one belligerent individual who made their way on property and was refusing to leave. So most times where there is an incident reported and security comes out and takes a look, if there is somebody there, they're able to just kind of shepherd them and move them along pretty easily without problems or concerns. And so though there are a lot of incidents, they're not overly serious body harming type of things.
Does anybody have a feel for, does anybody have a feel for how long it takes folks to realize that buildings are empty and vacated? And would the incidence of, vandalism or whatnot, would they increase over time, you say, or decrease over time?
I would say they're probably increasing over time as people do realize that these buildings are vacant and somewhat easy to get into, which is why I think we are seeing so many of them, and they're still coming through. I mean, if someone's reporting a busted up window, you can only really break that window once. So the fact that we're continuing to get incidents like that, I think is just showing kind of that decay breeds decay. And when you see things that are in distress, it's like, well, nobody else cares about this, so I'm gonna go not to care either. So I definitely think we're seeing some of that, and it is going to continue to escalate what we're seeing going on property.
Question regard. You good?
Yeah.
Okay. Question in regards to, I'm assuming Deb, what's the time frame it takes to get actual proposals in regards to demolish at least the secondary building, excluding 714 and 615 West First? Is there a statutory time frame that we have to put things out to find out what it would actually cost? Because
I believe Deb, go ahead, you're gonna be
Yeah.
more on top of timelines than I will for this one.
Well, this is, the amount of money that it would do for this demolition, it will have to be publicly bid. So we'd have to prepare a set of documents for bid, and we can do that I believe in a written scope of work, identify the scope. And so, if it takes a month or so to create that and to get that out for bid, it'll be sometime this fall before we know exactly what those actual prices would be in terms of a bid.
so realistically, this being July, could we have this, at least the cost aspect of it taken care of by September, end of September?
Nah, I don't think so. I think October is probably the earliest we would actually get that, because by the time that we prepare the scope documents, put it out to publicly bid, and then get everything back, I'd say probably more like October, maybe even November, before we fully get that.
Okay, what kind of cost do we look on that? And the reason I'm asking this question about demolish, except for the one we're using for the office, and then the 714 South Rogers, which realistically would have been torn down years ago if it was cost effective in any capacity to tear it down. Those are owned by the RDC and the city at the present moment. They are abandoned, power has been cut off, and they're an attractive nuisance that we own. So security or demolition, at some point, we have to look at what our public safety is from a standpoint of finding out about an incident instead of removing the possibility of an incident. And that's my concern in regards to where we're sitting here with abandoned buildings, sitting next to a neighborhood in an area that has activity occurring now with a police department that is stretched based on a lot of circumstances. So October, we could find out what it costs to do it and potentially move forward. Because your developers that you are interviewing for 8, 9, and 10, that process would take longer than being able to get bids before anything would be awarded to any one of them.
Yeah, correct. That is accurate.
Okay. So with that, then looking at, is 615 West First being occupied at the present moment by our staff? So it is being occupied.
No.
So.
Yeah, not by your staff, but by Milestone. So the contractor who's doing Phase 1 East, they're using that as a construction office. So we saved money on Phase 1 East by not having to have a construction trailer out there and get new power and everything like that. So we just kept the power on at 615. So they're using that as their office.
They moved a trailer out there also, if I'm correct.
There might be a storage trailer out there.
There's a large trailer on the east. Okay. And then 714 South Rogers, based upon, we know that building is there, it's part of a proposal. Is there any discussion about actually having anyone occupy a portion of that in order to have a presence? Because people in presence, I mean.
Yeah.
I'm just asking it because it's
Yeah,
there.
not that I'm aware of. Yeah, I don't know of any conversations or any that have been identified about potentially trying to occupy that building. I think the original intention was that very likely would be demolished, and there are several proposals on the table that are planning to demolish it. So
Okay.
that is, so I do not know of any conversations about potential occupancy.
Okay, other than demolish, but September, we could have a price to know what it would take to remove these attractive nuisances?
October, yeah.
Okay.
You asked for September. Nice try.
Always ask. Okay.
All right, any other questions?
I just have one. Deb, can you remind us about the security personnel that are currently patrolling? What type, how are they armed and what sort of training do they have? I'm asking particularly given that it seems like most of what they're doing is moving, getting people to move along.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Again, John Zodig is on vacation this week, is better poised to answer that specific question, and we can follow up with him. I don't know whether Larry knows, so I'm going to ask him to weigh in if he does. But I do think this is a sort of security for hire company. I don't even know if they're officially armed, but yeah, they have really no power other than to try to make sure that doors are closed and people are shooed away. But I don't think they have any real power other than that. Larry, anything to add there?
We didn't want them armed for the overnight shift, so they're not armed. Yeah. We did receive, we're in the process, as Deb noted, of getting the new proposals, and that's one of the differences between proposals is whether you have armed officers or unarmed officers.
So if there's a situation in which someone is moved along or there's some sort of altercation between a security officer and someone that is on the site, is there a way in which the city would end up becoming in some way liable?
That's part of the company doing business and the risk that their officers take. It wouldn't necessarily, unless we were you would run far afield to show that the city's liable in that regard. I don't want to say guaranteed never, because there's always a weird circumstance that comes up for that. But that's part of doing business. It's why we require any contractor we have to be fully insured against that kind of liability as well. Because it's going to be likely an employer claim for the individual security officer is going to sue any and everybody involved if they're injured.
Oh, well, I was actually thinking of the person. I was actually thinking of the other side.
It would be the same.
Not just the.
It would be the
there's
same.
a legal issue, but there's also an issue in terms of what that might look like, how that would be talked about in the community.
And so just to be also clear, the security, and Deb, you can fill in a little bit, the security officers are there to be kind of our legal representative. They're not necessarily there to be a forcefully removing anyone or getting into those types of altercations. Their instructions should be to call police if there's any threat of violence. Really, they're there to be able to advise of trespass on behalf of the RDC, to have a representative there under the law. So whenever if we do have to call the police, we can say, I've been hired by the RDC to make sure that no unauthorized person is on this land. I've advised them that they need to leave, and now they are officially committing the crime of trespass. Therefore, it warrants official police action. That's really how that should go. It shouldn't be an escalation by the security company in any way.
All right, go ahead, last question.
Last question for me, yeah. Regards
I
to
think I could cut the questions off.
the cost effectiveness accordingly, if we could pass it on into the land cost, or where would the money come from and how would it be allocated? Or where would it be allocated from? And I guess,
Yeah.
Jeff Underwood, can we afford it?
Yeah, all great questions. We have not talked at all about where the money might come from. In terms of demolition, in the past, everything has been funded through TIF, but we have not had those conversations. We wanted to at least bring back our findings, see how you felt about everything. The demolition was, a little higher than I thought it was going to be, so wanted to at least give you a report on where we're at, and that we can continue to have those conversations going forward.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Desma. Thank you, Deb.
Thanks.
Appreciate all the work.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I'll just finish with two last things as we look ahead to the August meeting. Hope to bring some continued updates about how does the city work through our own due diligence for the IU House final transfer of property, so that'll be a piece of the topics. And then we probably also need to look at the continued services with JS Health contracts, so that'll be something that we look forward to at our next contract as well, or the next RDC meeting, so.
All right, thank you, Deb.
Thanks.
All right, let's move on to new business. Resolution 23-57 to vacate covenants, conditions, and restrictions for the Trades District. Who'd like to speak in regards to this?
I believe we have Mayor Fernandez, if you'd like to come. Or Secretary, I don't know which one you prefer.
John. Yeah, this is follow-up to the discussion we had at a previous meeting, I think a couple months ago, about just trying to precondition the Trades District to be able to accelerate development opportunities, potentially sales of the land, et cetera. And these covenants and restrictions are a bit of an obstacle. I mean, they're not terrible, but they're also not necessary. And they were adopted back in 2018, about the same time that the Redevelopment Commission entered into an agreement to sell land to Tassos Corporation. And it wasn't the only driver, but it was a big driver as part of that deal to put in place some additional protections, if you will, for the company. They were concerned about the existing zoning for downtown and how under the zoning laws you could end up having, more, large multifamily developments or other things that might not be consistent with their vision for a research facility. Fast forward, about a year later, Tassos postponed their deal, and ultimately that transaction ended without the project happening. But the CCRs, or the covenants and conditions restrictions, stayed in place. We also updated the zoning ordinance since those restrictions were put on the property as well. So there's two elements to this for why we think it makes sense to repeal them. One is simplicity, to make it less complex for people to bring forward projects and deals for the Trades District. We have in place through our zoning, but also through the process for the Redevelopment Commission to sell land, requirements for project agreements. So we have multiple layers of checks and balances, if you will, that can enable the Redevelopment Commission and the public to really protect how the land is sold and developed. That doesn't really require another set of restrictions on top of the existing zoning. So we think we can simplify the process. The other part of the complexity has to do with creating a private property owners association. I mean, you typically see these for large, residential projects where you have like a homeowners association. Some business parks have similar kinds of associations, but typically in those cases, there's a lot more common area that is maintained for the benefit of all of the owners, and so they contribute to maintenance and repair. In the Trades District, in the land that's governed by these covenants and conditions and restrictions, there's really not any common area. On the map that's in the packet today, there's the depiction of where the common areas are. They're really adjacent to the mill. They're not even adjacent to any of the parcels that are covered by the covenants. There is some infrastructure that serves the district, and we'll talk about that separately, but that's actually underground, and it's placed underneath the plaza that the Redevelopment Commission owns and will continue to own. And there's a small parcel or a small carve out of common area directly adjacent to the garage that the Redevelopment Commission owns and will continue to own. So normally you would have like a park, or you would have sidewalks, or you would have other kind of infrastructure that an association would take care of. And that's just, it's kind of odd that you would have that kind of mechanism set up for things that aren't really directly on site where the properties are that we're trying to sell. On the zoning piece, if you do a side-by-side comparison of the architectural and design standards that are in the covenants and compare that to the zoning ordinance, there's very few differences that are really material. The biggest one being height. Depending how you read it, I'm not sure that they're even different, to be honest. They're very similar. There's setback requirements that are just slightly different. One where you can, require more building forward versus a little bit of a setback. The materials are essentially the same. The uses do get a little bit more complicated. As the covenants were adopted, this was pre-pandemic, it put some serious restrictions on mixed-use development. And, the total amount of commercial space or amenities that can be included in the entire acreage is very limited. And it's not really market at all for today, especially because it just restricts so much. And in trying to calculate what those actual amounts would be, or I haven't figured out how to do the math, to be honest. I mean, I'm not a mathematician, I'm a lawyer. But when you look at it, it says that 80% of the square footage for all the land needs to be employment. Well, how do you know what 80% means when you don't have a unified development? If you have one developer that bought the entire site and was a master developer, you could control that. But since we have different parcels that can be independently bought and sold, I don't know what 80% is of anything because you just don't know. So, I mean, there's some complexity here that you just can't really figure out. At least I can't. So I think, between the existing zoning, the fact that we would have to we would want to and are required to do a project agreement for any sales, I think we have adequate measures in place to deal with any of the design, the uses, those kinds of issues. On the common areas, there's a separate conversation happening that I think Larry can brief us on in terms of a proposed MOU with city utilities for them to essentially take on the ownership and maintenance of the underground stormwater facility. The maintenance of it isn't very expensive on an annual basis. It's more about the replacement. And so with that in mind, I think that we'd like to get the Redevelopment Commission to agree to and approve the rescinding of these CCRs. Larry, do you want to talk about the MOU or?
Yeah, so we don't have we're still in the process of finalizing the numbers. And one of the reasons why that's going to be an important step, as John is alluding to, is making sure, first of all, if any developers come in, that we are charging a potentially adequate amount as part of that development fee to maintain those systems, and also setting up an appropriate fund so that maintenance is actually covered for those things. And that was always anticipated as part of the trades district. I think, as some of you may recall, these underground water retention systems were kind of relatively new in the city of Bloomington. The utilities department prefers everything to be above ground. So in the original design conversations of the trades district, they wanted to put a retainage pond in the trades district, but that obviously kills some of your developable area. And so the compromise was to install this kind of stormwater retainage system. However, there is some ongoing maintenance to it, and then you have to actually move earth and potentially move some stones around and retainage walls and everything like that to do the repair. So we're just trying to make sure that we have an adequate system in place to make sure that the drainage is excellent, that it's an excellent developable area, that you all can be assured that the maintenance of your property is continuing, and it's continuing in good effect. And the utilities department seems to be the most logical source for that, and so that's why we we've started this negotiation and conversation with them. And just to preview going forward, this is outside of this, but we also want to unify this approach and think about how we're doing it for Hopewell as well, because we're going to have some of these same issues about, as long as the RDC owns this property, how we're going to take care of that infrastructure, and then how do we end up passing along those costs appropriately to developers without killing the opportunity for development, but also making sure that we're taking care of that infrastructure. So what you'll see here is this is the rescission of the covenants and restrictions, but the next step at probably your next meeting, we would bring to you an MOU between the RDC and the City of Bloomington Utilities, kind of covering some of those other steps about how much would need to be pledged for maintenance and possibly recovery, and then how much should be charged in future development agreements.
Can we do the pledging?
Yeah, both. So the pledging.
When you said how much would be pledged, I'm just trying to get the subject. And
So the RDC would probably be set aside some money that you've had to expend theoretically so far for maintenance of those things, and then also we would want to make sure that the RDC is putting into any development agreement a requirement for those developers to pay a certain amount of money.
Is this essentially a sinking fund that we're looking at in order to identify that we
Precisely.
have adequate dollars at any time?
That's right.
Okay. Now, as we look at that in our developer world, as we sell that, are we going a one-time fee, or because there will be stormwater fees that'll end up being collected off the surface areas of these buildings? So does that impact at all, or does that just go into our overall general stormwater maintenance? And this MOU that we're doing particularly describes those underground containments that have to be maintained in perpetuity.
I mean, I can speak to that, and that's one of the issues that, one of the reasons for proposing removing the CCRs is that, from an investment perspective, it's just it's very difficult to quantify that future liability. So you just don't know what it is. And again, I think the estimate on the annual maintenance to just clean out the existing infrastructure, it's de minimis. I mean, it's like $5,000. So, are you going to create a private company, have to go through the administrative process of doing annual assessments to figure out who owes how much based on the amount of land they own to collect $5,000? It just, that's kind of over the top. The real issue is, 25, 30 years from now, if you have to replace that infrastructure, nobody can really put a number on that. I mean, you can, but it's not as predictable. And that's what the utilities folks are doing right now, is trying to determine what would that future cost be, and can we do a sinking fund? So rather than having this association in place doing annual assessments, as part of a transaction, you would do a proportional payment at closing that would go into the fund, so you know exactly what your liability is from an investment perspective, and then they'll have the protection of being able to grow that. Right now, I mean, the Redevelopment Commission owns all the land, and so essentially you're paying all of it, so this would hopefully mitigate some of that going forward.
Is this, the CCR is a legal document, and does it have to be voted down or eliminated before you can have an MOU with the city about utilities? Is that a staged thing?
Well, no. I mean, we could have theoretically done the MOU before. We could do this in opposite order because, as we just said, you do own all the land and is required to pay all the maintenance. So instead of hiring a private company, we're going with utilities who has the expertise. It's really their stormwater system that this is going to feed into and is going to end up affecting in the long run. So that's why we felt that made the most sense in terms of, as opposed to contracting out with.
It almost seems that this is a little bit in reverse, to be able to quantify what the MOU looks like, what the numbers are before we vote on a CCR elimination. That would essentially, tie our hands without knowing what is in the MOU, knowing what the numbers are, et cetera. I do agree with Deb that it seems a little backwards.
Well, I mean, I think I wouldn't say this is tying your hands in any way, because just a gentle disagreement, I guess, is from the standpoint of all those options are still on the table for you. So if for some reason a MOU were to fall through, in terms of the future development agreements, we aren't committed at this point to doing anything in particular. So if you did want a long-term fund, we could try to negotiate that with the developer. Of course, there's going to be trade-offs to that, I think, as John's alluding to, trade-offs from the developer in terms of what we're going to get from that development versus a one-time fee. But because the RDC does own it, I mean, the responsibility right now, there's not a diversity of ownership, there's not an association at all, so the RDCs would be responsible. So if those systems fail, you know, there's just a lump sum coming to the RDC directly. One of the things we're just trying to do is make sure that that's more orderly. So the sinking fund helps us just kind of allay those costs over a longer period of time as opposed to having a lump sum.
No, I mean, I totally understand that. I just think that knowing the facts and details that would be contained in an MOU would be, it would be realistic to think that we would either look at that first and then look at this, or look at them at the same time. So you make a decision based on all the facts.
Yeah, and the other thing is just the CCNRs are the maintenance of the common areas, or in this case, the underground stormwater is just one element of the CCNRs.
Right.
It's a relatively small section of it, but it's something we've been focused on. We wanted to make sure we had a plan that makes sense, but I understand that concern.
By removing the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, after we move forward in this with in whatever process, MOU, and then moving out of the covenants and conditions that were associated with TOSs, are we looking at putting additional covenants and restrictions back in based upon, or we're just gonna let market force move forward?
I don't want to replace CCRs with new CCRs.
Okay.
I'd rather just live with the zoning.
With the zoning, which is overlying, because the UDO's already changed since we originally put these in. So the conditions and.
You have the zoning, but then you also have the ability to, negotiate a project agreement that can, be even more specific in some regards.
In that, because it'll be project specific based upon each lot that we've allocated in our plats.
On each deal,
Okay.
So just a couple other questions that I had. We talk in here that doing this will make it more marketable. I guess based on what? And then have we lost projects because of these CCRs?
I can't say that we've lost projects, but I can say that your appraisals are lower because of the CCRs.
So there's language in the appraisals that speak to that?
Yes. Yeah.
By how much?
For lots 1 and 2, it's almost 50. Well, I'll just tell you. Let me pull up. I don't want to misspeak because there's specific language in. It's about 50% on 2 of the lots.
Meaning it would be 50% higher if there was no CCR?
Mm-hmm. But again, and that's mainly driven, but I'm not saying that's a terrible thing, to be honest, because I think the reason that it's lower, the appraised value is lower with the CCRs is because of because you wouldn't be able to do big multi-family, apartment buildings for students.
But we couldn't do that anyway, right?
Under the zoning, you could, but we're not gonna do it, and in the notice of offerings, it's.
Right, it's
spelled out.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, the thing that seems the most kind of problematic about the CCR is this 80-20 ratio of
Yes.
requiring 80% be devoted to office space. That's not going to, we can't keep the CCR and have a functioning, vibrant
Exactly.
trade district. That's just, they're incompatible with each other.
With reality. It's not there anymore.
So, I mean, that's, but, and that has an impact on the market value as well, Cindy, is that those ratios are really funky. And I agree, I mean, ideally, we could be, doing the MOU and the CCR simultaneously, but I'm kind of anxious to.
A meeting apart,
Yeah.
the MOU be ready for next meeting?
That's
Is there a timeline revolving this discussion, or could it be done in 2 weeks?
I can't speak to when the MOU will be ready.
There's anything pending that needed to be addressed.
Well, we wanted to do them as we were doing the notice of offerings. So, as we know and what I'm sure was made public at 4 o'clock, we do have one offer on the table for a sale. So it'd be nice to have this resolved prior to closing on that. But I don't think that's going to happen in 2 weeks, so I think we're okay.
So do you feel like that these CCRs would be detrimental to that offer?
Yeah. I mean, you can't do it under the CCRs.
So this proposal is dead if the CCR exists.
Yeah. I mean, it says the maximum standalone commercial project is 10,000 square feet. I mean, that's just...
Although at least what I hear from Cindy's questions is more just trying to align the MOU with this as opposed to that we should keep the CCRs. It's more just trying to I agree
No, I
with the
agree with
idea
that.
of getting all the information. So it's just, if there's any other time considerations that would be relevant within that 2-week window to really have those 2 documents available at the same time for review.
It just seems like in order to make a comprehensive decision, being armed with all the facts might be beneficial for us.
Think we can pull that together in 2 weeks, Larry?
It won't be 2 weeks, it'll be 3, because there's just more Mondays in July, so the next meeting is August 7th. So just 3 weeks. It literally is just in CBU's court, so it's just them telling us how much it's gonna cost so we can plug it in. That's what's remaining. So.
Super.
Yeah, I would just reiterate that there are 2 pieces to this. There's the stormwater thing, and then there's all the other restrictions and covenants. And those are real problematic in terms of the city being able to advance the actual vision for the trades district. And, so, I mean, I don't disagree. It'd be nice to be able to do simultaneously, but, I mean, I don't know what the option is, for your utilities, other than the way it is now. I mean, the Redevelopment Commission has 100% ownership of the problem, so.
And that stormwater is not going to go away. Our facilities are already installed, and they've already been sized for all of the development that's
Right.
been. So now it's a matter of how we identify covenant restriction changes versus cost for long-term maintenance.
Plus, if I read our therefore if it resolved that section, it has to go from us doing an approval to vacate the declaration, and then it has to go to the Plan Commission to do a similar vote. Am I right?
So it has to go at least through the planning department. What we're just in terms of that process, because the RDC is the sole owner, that might be a staff level approval. It technically goes before the plan commission, but may not have to go before the full plan commission. It just may have to have staff level approval. So regardless, we're saying it's the plan commission approval just because it's a recorded covenants with the plan.
After we say. if
Yeah,
we
there is
approve it,
still
that you need
time potentially.
for
Yeah.
Selling that, trying to sell
Yeah.
that first offer
Yep.
for the first property.
Okay, so if we made a motion subject to the utilities cost?
So,
'Cause
yeah, if you're asking how 2 motions, it just depends in terms of what I'm hearing from most of the board. There's obviously you could postpone to the next meeting. That's completely within the bounds. Also, it could be that if you want to pass this conditional upon completion of an MOU by the next meeting, we could also do that. That's completely up to you. It's that's a little bit of an unusual condition, but not so outside the bounds that we couldn't do it. So.
Would that persuade the CBU to move on it a little faster?
CBU, they know that they need to move on it as soon as possible.
If we can nudge a little bit, does that help?
Sure. Any little bit helps if we're all rowing in the right direction. But
So it sounds like there's not a time constraint, and the August 7th meeting could be appropriate to discuss all of it.
yeah, we could do that.
the only question I have, is that doesn't create a lost opportunity for us.
So with the, if I may, I'm sorry, John, to just jump in. I would say, you know, in terms of, did receive an offer, that would still have to be, any action that we take on that would have to be approved by the RDC, which also could be, you know, later in the next meeting. So we could target August 7th for a potential piece of action, but we would just, the way we would order it as CC&Rs, MOU, and then action on that particular offer, so that as to not.
MOU, CCR.
Or MOU, CC&R, although resolution number-wise, it'll be a little bit different, but you'll have the.
I just want to play this out. So let's say that you don't like the MOU, I mean, then what? I mean,
Actually makes a case for waiting, right?
Yeah, that kind of makes the case stronger to wait.
no, I mean, my point is that you'll be in a worse position if you, I mean, because, I mean, if we keep the CCRs, you're going to lose a deal. And if you did have the deal, I mean, I don't know how you, how to say it other than, you know, under the CCRs, if, you know, Acme Development buys parcel 1, there's no, you know, no contribution to the capital replacement budget. So they will only be proportionately liable for whatever the annual maintenance cost is.
And if no one else buys.
So
then
you
we're
still have
responsible for the rest.
100% of all the, you know, well, more like 85% responsibility for everything. So I just, you know, it's just, it's hard to negotiate things when everything's kind of up in the air, is my point. It'd be nice to get some clarity.
Are you saying that if we today got rid of the CCR, not knowing anything about the utilities MOU, and still being responsible for all the utilities, no matter what happens, minuses, that, and if they, and they don't want to participate, we don't get any money for anything from anyone toward utilities, except our own, because they won't even buy the property. And if they did buy the property without the CCR, we would at least get some portion, because they would have bought into it with that.
Well, what's conceived in the MOU is that rather than having an uncertain liability in the future, there's a reasonable estimate of what that is today, and you pay it up front. And so if this, the way things are now, you just wouldn't have that. I guess we could kind of negotiate that, but then, you know, the bigger question is that the restrictions, you know, the non-utility restrictions, I mean, you can't do the deal at all. So
Do you think that we'd lose the deal between now and August 7th, John, if we don't act on the CCRs today? Okay.
No, I'm just saying that at some point, you know, it's, I want to be able to negotiate in good faith, but I can't, you know.
And I think my perspective is I want to be able to feel good about the decision that we're making, armed with all the facts. And I feel like that it's prudent on our part to do that.
So, and a motion was made in regards to the conditional approval of the CCR recension, subject to the review of the MOU at our August 7th meeting, where we can review and discuss and then vote based on MOU, CCR removal, and potentially an opportunity.
I think you
just
could
move it to the next meeting.
You can certainly do that. I think the cleaner, if you're not going to take action or you don't want to take action on it, the cleaner way is just to go ahead and postpone it until the next meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, postpone. You need a motion on that, or?
No, I think we just.
We do,
Okay.
yeah. Just, it makes it cleaner for the record so that we can have it in the minutes of the detailed action that was taken. I know we could write it down, but it's nice when you take official action.
All right, who has a resolution for Resolution 23, or who wants to make a motion for Resolution 23-57?
Go for it, Randy.
I'll make a motion to postpone resolution 25-27.
23.
23-27.
57.
23-57 until the next RDC meeting.
I'll second that.
All right, we have a first and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? All right, next item of business is Resolution 23-58. Approval of site access agreement at West Fountain Drive. Who'd like to speak to this?
So this is also has to do with utilities. They are investigating putting in some stormwater infrastructure improvements along 8th Street and West Fountain Drive. That's actually just north of what I call the Stardust Bridge that always gets hit by moving trucks every fall. And we'll try our best to go ahead and give it a good whack before the end of the year. But in this case, there are 3 parcels of property. One's owned by CBU, one's owned by the city of Bloomington generally, and one's owned by the Redevelopment Commission. This is right there at basically a triangle piece of land where Adams, Fountain, and 8th Street meet, if you're familiar with that area or just looking at the map that's included in the packet. As part of this project, or looking into this project, Utilities wants to do a Phase 1 environmental, or is required to do a Phase 1 environmental because this is a former brownfield site. There is money available to them through the state of Indiana, through the Indiana Finance Authority. One of the requirements, though, is they want to have clear authorization to enter upon the land. Now, since this is a Phase 1 environmental, it is not invasive. So really, it's a matter of having the environmental consultant come out, stand on the property, and kind of give it a good look over, and then do a bunch of historic documentation about what's there. So, this is pretty straightforward. There wouldn't be any remediation even necessary for them to take. Now, depending on what they find with the Phase 1 and as part of this grant program, there could be further steps, but of course that would come back to you in terms of if there needed to be a Phase 2 and they needed to do potholing, or if somehow they found that there's an underground storage tank there, which I don't know, it should have been remedied under the former brownfields, I just don't know. Then that would come back to you in a separate resolution. This doesn't authorize for all time entry onto that property and to do whatever they want. It's really just for the Phase 1.
Anybody have any questions? Any commissioners have any questions on Resolution 23-58?
One quick question. How do we get rid of this piece of property and give it to Public Works?
We could talk about that. Certainly, intergovernmental transfers happen all the time. That's certainly something that we probably should talk about as part of this project, and would come up as part of this project, and we'd probably want to transfer it to them so that they can own and operate it. Ideally, we would do it in negotiations for getting the numbers for the MOU on the Trades District so that they couldn't have the property until they got those.
Okay. I'll make a motion to approve Resolution 23-58.
I'll second.
All right, first and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, next item, any business or general discussion by the group tonight? If not, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. All right, good night, everyone.